Orbiting a distant star in the Stanton system is the city planet Arc Corp, a world covered completely in factories and cities. Even at 1/6 the scale of an actual planet, the planet's surface of Arc Corp is covered in over 8 million square kilometers of modeled city. From high catwalks and rooftops bathed in sunlight to permanently shaded alleyways, Arc Corp promises the closest thing we may ever get to a full-scale Coruscant in a video game. Hey guys, I'm Morphologist, and in this episode of An Architect Reviews, I punish myself by trying to review a planet covered in architecture. And I'm not being hyperbolic, because you may have noticed that it's been 2 weeks since my last post. This has really been a difficult video to try to put together. But if you've been watching my Architect Review series, you probably have seen that I posted a video on Cyberpunk for a Night City review, and so I thought it'd be a good time to come back and take a look at Star Citizen's equivalent, and see whether or not it really stacks up. So sit back, relax, and if you like the video and think I deserve it by the end, make sure you don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. The scale of Arc Corp is mind-boggling. There's nobody else in gaming that has come even close to this level of scale. And so while it's not the focus of this video because I'm going to be reviewing the architecture and design of Arc Corp, I think it's important to first tackle a big question you're probably going to have, and that is all of it explorable? Well, yes and no. You can fly extremely close to pretty much every square inch of this planet. However, you can't land anywhere you like. You're only able to land on the rooftops, which are pretty highly detailed, and at major ports and cities. This is of course for reasons of practicality. While they're able to make entire planet and moon surfaces for natural environments, it's much harder to pull off for a city where things are supposed to look built and have people and flying cars and etc. And so it probably would never be able to be pulled off in the lifetime of the developers if they were to try to even make one planet in Star Citizen's 100 star systems that detailed. Still though, the points of interest that CIG are focusing on are meant to be as detailed as possible, to feel believable, and that's something we're going to evaluate a little bit later after we take a look at the macro scale of this planet. So Arc Corp is broken into two basic types of district. You've got your industrial areas, which are covered in factories, and this makes up the majority of the planet's surface, and then you have your commercial districts, which are the places of interest that you can actually fly to, like areas 3 through 39. The commercial areas are made unique by their very tall structures, the towers that you see in clusters like what we've seen here at the beginning of the video. These areas are the most interesting. They've got deep trenches with traffic that passes to and from them, and skyscrapers that reach as high as 5 kilometers above sea level. And yes, there is a sea buried somewhere beneath this mechanical jungle. One thing I think that Arc Corp does particularly well, or at least I should say CIG's artists have pulled off convincingly well here, is to develop a style guide, a typology for a type of architecture that is built on Arc Corp. Now, in case you're curious, Arc Corp was built by a single company over a very short period of time. This is why many of the buildings have a similar color scheme as well, this burgundy red, which is the signature color of the Arc Corp. This fast construction and lore also provided direction to the design team to figure out how to represent that in the design of the buildings themselves, and so if you look closely at many of these structures, you'll notice that they're constructed of what looks to be prefabricated metal paneling. Consequently, this also helps to explain the repetition in the buildings that you see. Of course, practically speaking, this is how you create a building with so many assets. You have to use the same ones over and over, but it fits in lore conveniently. If I were to classify the architectural style though, I'd probably say it's something like a neo-mechanical brutalism. And that's because it is constructed in a very mechanical way, and I think brutalism fits well because the structures themselves are very expressive and monolithic with few windows. Overall then, the buildup of structures and their configurations look convincing from afar. On closer inspection, you don't really see clear streets like what we have today, but then again, this is a city planet built rather quickly in the very distant future, and so 900 years in the future, things are probably a little bit different with flying cars and different modes of transportation. Still though, this is a review, and if I were to judge it by a metric, I would probably judge it by believability, and I think it scores high on that mark. However, the interactability of it is a bit limited. As you'll discover later in the video, we only currently have Area 18 as a major landing zone, and I hope to see that expanded in the future so that we can land in more points of interest around the planet's surface to make it feel a little bit more interactable and full of life. I envision various missions or drop-off points or even apartments that you can rent around the planet's surface, and that would make it feel a lot more filled out. So that's the planet on the macro scale, but how does it hold up when you get up close and personal with it? Now, I've talked a lot about scale in this video. I've talked about how big these buildings are, but one of the things that's really hard to see and experience for yourself is this scale, and it can only really be appreciated by landing on them or near them. That's what makes the Area 18 spaceport such a disappointment. You land in an enclosed pad, which on its own is well designed, but I think that it's a lost opportunity to really show visitors for the first time when they land just how big these buildings actually are, because it's hard to really appreciate while flying around. I've told you that these are 5 kilometers high in some cases, but flying around you really wouldn't know that. When you're flying around, everything looks small. And so my first really big critique for Area 18 is that if they were to go back and redo the landing zones, I would have them have some pads that you can land on that are on the surface level that really display and embrace and embellish the scale of Arc Corp. It's such a shame that they spent so much time and effort on this, and yet we can't really experience it landing. The spaceport itself isn't super big, but it does give the feeling of scale with high ceilings and a lot of expressive structure. While the exteriors of the buildings on Arc Corp feel brutalist, I think that the interior is something else. It's far too colorful and diverse to really be considered classical brutalism. I'm not quite sure what to classify it as, but I think it's an interesting kind of space that we don't have in the real world. And I think that's because it comes down to the construction methods and materiality. You see, in the real world, metal paneling is actually quite expensive and is often only used to clad the exteriors of buildings and some parts of interiors, but is never really used as a structural material unless we're talking about like steel frame construction. But in a fictional universe 900 years in the future, where manufacturing has become far more streamlined and everything is manufactured by machines on a gigantic machine world, then I can see this being a more practical means of construction. Prefabricating everything and then only having it be a kit of parts that can be assembled by a series of robots or maybe even humans makes a lot of sense when you want to build things fast. Your only bottleneck becomes how fast you're able to screw things together, as opposed to having to wait a set amount of time for things like concrete to set up to be fully able to take the load of the structure above. Spatially though, I think that the space is really successful. I particularly like how the floor level is very brightly colored, whereas the ceiling and walls are burgundy and like dark colors. I think it really is a nice contrast. One thing I particularly like about this space though is that they've located the ASOP terminal centrally in the space with a very large column-like structure that really draws your attention and guides you even subconsciously to it. This is where players are able to pull their ships from, and I don't think there needs to even be a label for you to be able to figure that out. And this is the true mark of a successful design, one that communicates the use of the space through the spatial organization as opposed to overuse of signage, which is sort of a band-aid on an issue. Exiting the spaceport though, you'll find yourself passing through what looks to be security. This in the future is what's going to be used to find out whether or not you're bringing a weapon into the commercial area of Area 18, where weapons understandably will not be permitted. I think that the scanning area is also a really good example of how light can help enhance a space and communicate that something different is happening. The blue light really does help it feel like it's a passageway that is doing something special. It feels special to walk through, and I like that about this design. Beyond that, we find ourselves on what is very clearly designed as a subway platform, though in the case of Area 18, it's not a subway, it's a flying sort of bus-like tram, which is a really, really cool experience. and one of the things that is sadly missing from Cyberpunk that I was really hoping we would see. To me, the tram isn't just about transportation or convenience, it's a way for the artists to introduce a user to a space in a very well-crafted approach. Think of how Half-Life 1 did their introduction with their tram and how they utilized that moment to introduce you as a player to the world of Half-Life and the Black Mesa facility. Now, you may not have played that game, but basically it's a way to craft entry, and this is something we do in architecture. We very carefully craft the way that you approach a space so that you can experience it in a way that we think is best for you to fully appreciate it or to understand how the space is going to be used. But it's also an opportunity for the designer to evoke an emotional reaction in the user by emphasizing a key important aspect of the design, and in the case of Area 18, it's the scale of the space, the sense of verticality. This is an opportunity for CIG to introduce you to just how big Arc Corp actually is, and I think it does it very well. It's probably the best introduction to a landing zone that you'll find in any of the landing zones right now in the game. But now it's time to take a closer look at the Area 18 landing zone and see where its successes and shortcomings may lie. Expression of scale is something that we're going to see reappear over and over through our tour of this space. Stepping off the tram will be your first experience up close and personal with the scale of the towers in the commercial districts, and they don't disappoint. Every way you turn is a reminder of just how big it is. Even holographic advertisements tower above you. One of the strategies that we've covered in previous episodes of An Architect Reviews is the compression and then decompression of space by lowering the ceiling height and the size of spaces before you get into larger spaces to really emphasize the difference and highlight scale. They do this a lot in Area 18 as you dive in between very compressed small human scale spaces to very large and impressive otherworldly locations, like right when you arrive at the main plaza at Area 18. And this brings me to another success, I think, of Area 18. One of the challenges of navigating big spaces is keeping your orientation correct, understanding where you are relative to other things, and one of the ways that we do this in architecture and design, and even urban design, is by creating wayfinding devices that are easily locatable visually, such as tall towers or very unique objects like this Arc Corp cog thing that helps to let you know where you are relative to where you came in, so you can always find the exit. One of the things I also really like about this space is how even though they have very tall towers just adjacent to the plaza, they're able to still get sunlight to penetrate into the space to really play with light and shadow and use the atmospheric effects to further emphasize distance and size. One of the other things that also really jumps out to me in this space, though, is the panelization of every surface. Not just the buildings, but the ground you walk on. Now, realistically speaking, this probably wouldn't be very safe, as a lot of little panel gaps and bolts and stuff can cause you to trip, but I'm guessing this isn't really too much of a concern in this future universe because it's pretty much everywhere. Now at this point you're probably curious how many of these buildings you can actually go into and explore. Well, the good news is that in Area 18 a fair amount of them are actually explorable and have a real purpose, such as here at the trading hub where you can buy and sell commodities for trading at other locations in the Stanton system and going into the future in other star systems around Star Citizen's universe. It's a neat but small space that has a really nice big picture window that looks out onto Arc Corp from a different vantage point. The main attraction for some of you, though, may be going to the tallest tower in Area 18, and that's the one directly across from the cog when you exit the tram. This place is the one that's probably around 5 kilometers high, and it is technically accessible. However, the rooms that you can actually get to through the elevator, unfortunately, are not as high as you probably would have hoped. This, of course, is a bit of a disappointment and a missed opportunity that I hope they come back and fix at some future point. The entry, though, to the Arc Corp Tower is pretty neat. I like these massive glass doors that slide all the way to the sides to create a gigantic opening. It's really, really special. However, the way you enter the space is a bit awkward. While the glass doors are centrally located, the entry foyer leads you off to the right and left, which is off-center from the centrally located hologram that's supposed to be your introduction to Arc Corp. Now, the reason why they've done this, I think, is because of game design. They cull the interiors of buildings when you're not in them, and you would see that through the glass doors, and that would look pretty bad, but it creates this very awkward entry condition where the guide hologram is off-center in a weird position. But further, I think the space is just very awkward. From above, it looked a lot better, but from ground level, it feels strange, especially because this upper area with the help desk feels overscaled as compared to the lower area with the guide hologram, which I think personally should have hierarchy over this upper space right here, which has a lot of underutilized space. I think this is a symptom of modeling from the bird's eye view too much and not getting down to the ground level to see how it feels from the eyes of the user. And this is something I would encourage you as designers to always do throughout your process, to put yourself back into the design from the human perspective and see how it feels, and then make changes if you discover anything you didn't see before. As a little bit of a side note here, this building also contains the Million Mile High Club, which is an exclusive club that is only accessible to a very small amount of backers. This base, unfortunately though, is a little disappointing and has no view to the city, as you might expect. I hope that this is something that they fix at some point in the future. But I don't want to get too bogged down in the details of every interior space because there are too many to cover in this video, and they probably deserve their own video for each space. Instead, I want to focus on the street level itself and how the city feels, and there are a few more things that I think I want to point out in this video before we conclude. One thing that I want to talk about is program for the city. One thing that you'll often find in real cities are little tiny shops and stands where you can buy food or little articles while you're on your way to a meeting or to trade, and they've got lots of that here in Area 18. Little tiny noodle shops and bars in the back alleys that are reminiscent of what you find in Asia, like in Hong Kong or Taiwan where I live. They help the space feel more alive and are relevant considering that your character actually does need to eat and drink to stay alive. Area 18 also, of course, has its own bar, which I'm not going to go too much into. I'm only going to note that it exists, and it's a cool place to visit if you're stopping by the city. Spatially, I also think that they do something really well with Area 18 with their catwalks and passovers throughout the visitable area. This really gives you an opportunity to walk above the canyons and get a sense of the verticality of the space. Again, coming back to this sense of verticality, which is so important when you're trying to express cityscape. But this leads me to another criticism I have of Area 18, and that's our elevation change. Well, there is a small amount of elevation change with a few different levels that we can visit. We can't really get too high or too low, which is a bit of a disappointment. I would love to have been able to access some of the higher penthouses or the lower levels, maybe the ones that never see the light of day, where you could make those cool, shady back alley deals that you see in Star Wars lore, etc. That being said, though, there are some back alleys that you can find if you look around long enough, and one of them actually does contain a really cool mission giver in Star Citizen that will give you some illegal missions that pay quite a bit but put you at risk of being arrested and put in prison, so be careful if you find Twitch Pacheco, because if you fail her mission and get caught by police, you may end up in jail for a few hours. While I could continue going on for a few more hours, there's just one last thing that I think is really important to talk about in Area 18, and that's the lighting. Lighting can make or break your design, and if you are a designer, you should never underestimate its impact. The designers here dance carefully between light and shadow, creating contrast and dynamicism, highlighting spaces where you are supposed to visit, and shading ones where back alley deals may be permitted to exist. But in the case of game design, they can also be storytellers, letting you know an area is industrial or an area is dangerous. Of all the elements of Area 18, the lighting strikes me as the most accomplished and the most emotionally moving. I found so many different places that could be straight out of a painting of some cyberpunk future. And I think it's this aspect that makes the space very immersive. Overall then, despite Area 18's limited size and the limited amount of areas that you can actually visit and land on Arc Corp, I still find it to be a technological marvel and architecturally speaking, very successful in many ways. While there are areas to improve, that can be said of virtually any design, even those that are considered finished and built. And knowing CIG, I know they're not done with this place just yet, so I'm excited to come back and revisit this at some point in the future. But what do you guys think? Did I miss anything, or did I hit all the key points that you've thought of? Let me know down in the comments section below. Otherwise, I hope to see you guys in the next Architect Reviews.